Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. Just recently in our Facebook group that we started called Intuitive Awakening, there was a really interesting conversation that emerged around one of the users' posts. And by the way, the Intuitive Awakening group is awesome and filled with awesome people. So if you'd like to join it, please do so as long as you are equally as awesome. If you're a really cool person into personal development and want to join Intuitive Awakening Facebook group, please feel free to do so. There's some really high quality conversations that go on in that group. And this was one of them. It was a conversation around the concept of when have we gotten to a point of personal development that no longer allows for self-acceptance? If we hit a place where we believe that we have to be pushing ourselves beyond exhaustion, like, is that too far? Like, is the person who started this whole conversation was essentially saying, I'm exhausted. Like, I keep pushing myself in personal development and I just feel super tired. I'm feeling very worn out about it. And that was such an intriguing concept because most people who are into personal development are people who start out being kind of hard on themselves. They want to get to the next level. They're people who don't generally rest on their laurels. And I can completely understand and sympathize with, maybe even empathize. I think I've been there before, where it feels like my growth journey is getting me to a point of exhaustion. Like, I'm so tired, and how much pushing do I have to do? And why do I have to be a better version of myself? And can't I just be, and of course, in the most ungenerous times, like, can't I just be like everybody else and just like not care about this stuff and, not have to become a better version of myself? Can't I just, sit around and like watch, reality television and eat Cheetos and call it good? And there's I think there's a very important balanced perspective on this. And that's what we want to address. We want to address what is the most balanced perspective around the concept of making sure that your personal development journey isn't swallowing you up in sadness, isn't making you feel discouraged or depressed or exhausted. Because if it's doing that, it's that's basically what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get to a place where we aren't feeling that way by, just our day-to-day life. So we thought it would be a really interesting conversation to maybe unpack some of that, maybe talk about what is the healthiest perspective that we can take when it comes to this concept of self-acceptance versus, constant improvement.
Let's talk about the reason we as people get into personal development in the first place. We start off in life and we're moving through life, and there's something we're unsatisfied with in our life. We have a dissatisfaction. We're not satisfied with how our lives have gone, maybe. Maybe it's just a small area. Maybe it's a physical thing like our weight. Maybe we're not happy with our body shape or our weight. And so we're unsatisfied. So we get into some kind of a growth framework where we decide to work out of the gym, or we take up running, or we do something to change the dissatisfaction we have with an element of our life. And this happens in all sorts of levels. And often we approach personal development as people. Most people approach it from a one aspect of their life. Usually people have something, and the most obvious example is your health, because I think a lot of people, even if they're not into personal development, most people want to look and feel healthy. And most people have a time in their life where they are on quote unquote a diet or a certain way of eating and exercising, where they're trying to get their physicality back in shape. And they call it getting back in shape, right? It's this idea that we're unsatisfied with something and we're going to do the hard work to become more satisfied with ourselves around this area. So I think it's important. It seems elementary, but it's important to think about the framework most people come through personal development or come to personal development having. Unsatisfied, I want to be more satisfied with this area of my life. Well, I think for people that are into personal development, what ends up happening is they might start there with something like their health, and they realize, wow, I'm unsatisfied with this one area of my life. I just proved to myself I can make changes and become a better version of myself in this one area. And you start to ask yourself, I wonder what else this applies to. I wonder if other things I'm unsatisfied with in my life, I don't just have to take them. I don't just have to live there. I can actually make proactive changes, take responsibility, and move the ball forward, actually grow in certain ways. And then you start to see all sorts of options open up. And again, maybe it's all around physical things at first. Maybe it's around your health. And then it goes to other tangible physical things like your relationships. And then you start to think about more esoteric or abstract ways of growing. Maybe it's internal things. Maybe there are things around, how you perceive reality or how you want to move through life, not just at a relationship level with your lover or your spouse, but with all people. And you start to see that you can grow and develop in all these areas of life, which starts to get you excited about all the possibilities. So now life no longer feels like something you got to just take, that's what's given to you. You have some measure of control, some measure of impact, some measure of ability to change what you're unsatisfied with to a place where not only are you satisfied, but maybe thriving and happy in that area of your life.
Yeah, we hadn't talked about this podcast before we started. We talked a little bit about it. We talked about the conversation starter. But you and I, sometimes we sit down and like map out a podcast really clearly and know exactly what we're going to say and where we're headed. And sometimes we just turn the microphone on and start talking. And I think both of us had a few ideas around this concept, but I think we were going to mostly allow it to unfold. And what you just said is something I hadn't really considered before we turned the microphone on, which is that a lot of people start their personal development journey from a place of dissatisfaction. Like that's why they start, is because they're not happy with something. And I could see basically making that a habit, making it a habit of doing personal development from the platform of dissatisfaction, as opposed to having a habit of thinking about personal development from a platform of full satisfaction. There's almost this idea that you develop and grow because you're not happy with something. There's that assumption because, like you said, most people, when they're doing a personal development project, and they might not call it personal development, they might call it losing weight or making money or, whatever. They might call it something else. It is basically a personal development project. They generally do it because, like you said, they're not coming from a fully satisfied place. And so we get it in our minds that that's the platform of all growth. The platform of all growth is dissatisfaction. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think some of you listening, you might be somebody who just has always been into growth and development. You might be somebody who just has always seen themselves this way. And so it might be almost impossible to chart back to the etymology of that moment when you realize that this was the path you wanted to take. There are some people who it almost feels like they're intrinsically into growth. And then other people come into it later in life. I came into it later in life. I wasn't into personal development when I was younger. And so I came into it around my 30s, and it was because I was fully dissatisfied with components and aspects of my life. And I think there was a space that I entered at a certain point when I realized that this was such a leverage point that even if there wasn't anything I could point to and go, oh gosh, this is the thing that I hate, or this is the thing that I'm so unhappy with, or this is the part of me I'm so dissatisfied with. Even if there wasn't something I could specifically point to, I still felt like I wanted to hit the next level because I had been on a trajectory of getting to the next level and I started to get addicted to it. So I think that is a really powerful reframe to come from, that not all growth has to happen from dissatisfaction. It can actually come from a place of being satisfied, but just wanting to hit the next level.
I think it's a worldview difference. There's a split here. There's two different versions of how we show up to growing ourselves and personal development. The one is a framework that life is a problem to be solved. There's something I'm dissatisfied with in my life. I've got to solve this problem. It's about problem versus solution. I've got to find a solution to this challenge in my life. And I think most people start off with this worldview. I think they start off with that worldview. And when they begin to realize they have the power and the ability to make changes in their life, they shift from seeing life as a problem to be solved, and they start seeing life as a game to be optimized. They start seeing life as something they can plus and continually improve and make better in little incremental ways. So you have somebody that wants to lose weight, they go to the gym, they work out just on a physical level, and they become pretty healthy. Their muscles are chiseled, they're tight, they're toned, they're eating healthy, they feel great. Are they going to just quit improving their physical health? Or are they going to find ways to continue plussing that? Now you can see somebody that maybe goes through that transition point from now that they've solved the problem of maybe being overweight or feeling unhealthy to saying, okay, now I feel really great. I feel healthy. Are there more nuances here? Are there more plussings that I can do? Are there more optimizations I can bring to this table and continue moving forward? I think out of this comes this whole idea of self-acceptance versus pushing yourself. I think in here lies the navigation for us as people, as we move in personal growth and personal development, about how we'll actually grow as people. So I think this is really good conversation. I'm excited what we're going to unpack here.
Yeah. Coming from that platform, from that frame, is a great starting point. It doesn't have to be because you're dissatisfied. It doesn't have to be because you're unhappy. Like you said, it doesn't have to be that I'm trying to solve problems. It could be that I'm trying to optimize a game, or I'm trying to optimize what's already there. So at the premise level, when you're going through personal development, what is your premise? Is your premise that you're broken, that your life is not working? Or is your premise that it's okay, but it could be better? And I think that is a really important reframe. If you come from the latter, if you come from things are broken, I'm broken, things are not okay, and that actually might be to some extent true. You might be going through a time period where things are not okay, like things don't feel good. And in that time period, that might be what personal development is for you, is a time period of getting out of a space where things are not okay. Things do feel broken. But is that an overarching theme? Is that like how you have framed your entire life? Is that things are not okay? And when you're in development, one of the healthiest things to do is to graduate from, okay, so the thing that wasn't okay, I made that okay. And so now I can go to the next level of the optimization. So just having a really solid framework, or a really good platform, a really good premise, that it doesn't have to be about brokenness. It can be simply about optimization, I think is really powerful. I think the second piece is, as I mentioned before, people who get into personal development and growth, they have a tendency to be kind of hard on themselves. I actually, my opinion is that everybody's hard on themselves. Even the people who appear to be harder on everybody else than they are on themselves, I think that's just projection. I think they're still really hard on themselves. They just haven't gotten to a space where they can admit that they're now trying to just project it onto others. But people who are into personal development have gotten to a point where they can accept that there are failings. And one of the reasons why they are pushing themselves to grow and develop is because they're not resting on their laurels, because they want to get better. And so because we have a tendency in development to be hard on ourselves, then another really important reframe is to ask yourself just how hard on yourself are you? What's your self-talk? How are you communicating with yourself? When I think of how I view friends and the people who I love in my life, I'm pretty generous with them. In fact, I would say that I'm fully accepting of who they are at this time. However, at the same time, I also know that they could get better, because we all can get better. So I celebrate their growth. I cheerlead their growth. I want to be there for them while they're growing. And also, I accept them as they are in this moment before they've reached that next level.
I kind of know the answer to this, but you haven't always been that way.
Oh, no.
You used to see the potential in someone, and used to base your friendships on their potential even more than their actual person at the moment, right?
Yes.
And you've changed that in recent years.
Oh, yeah.
Been more accepting of people as they are, not what they could be.
Right. Well, and that did give me a very cynical view of people, because when I met somebody, I could see them at their greatest potential, and that was the person I was becoming a friend with. And if they didn't meet that highest potential that I saw in them, then I would get very disenchanted with them, and I would become very cynical. I would think that people would be betraying me because I saw them different than they saw themselves, or than they were showing up. And so, yeah, that was, and that probably was, again, that's a projection of how I saw myself. I wasn't allowing myself to be wherever I was. I only wanted to be at the highest level, the most optimized version of myself. And so I wasn't self-accepting, and so I couldn't be others accepting either. And I think you can reverse engineer it. I think you can go from that direction of learning self-acceptance in order to accept others, or you can reverse engineer it. You can learn self-acceptance by accepting others first, right? It can go either direction, because it teaches you the skill of acceptance just in general. So whichever one you're having more of a struggle with, just go the opposite. Use the other tool. But I was thinking how generous people can be about their loved ones, while at the same time being incredibly hard on themselves. So what's your self-talk? Are you much more hard on yourself than you are of the people that you love in your life? Can you find that you accept them as they are while at the same time cheerleading who they can become? And can you apply that to yourself? Can you see yourself as a friend that you're going through a journey with? Can you accept yourself as you are right now and at the same time cheerlead yourself to greater advancement?
You mentioned cheerlead. And, if you've got kids, you're listening, you've got kids, you do this all the time with your children. I do this with my 3 children. I don't beat them up for things they don't know at the time of their life they're in. At the time of this recording, my eldest son is 10, Gunner, and if he doesn't know something that maybe a 17-year-old should know, I don't, oh, you're terrible, and I beat him up, and I don't accept him for who he is. I know where he's at in his life. He's making the best decisions. Hopefully, he's making the best decisions he can make at the time of life he's in. And I'm here to cheerlead and coach and help direct him in making better and better decisions. I don't think he's broken. He's just at a different level of development. And I think, one of our colleagues, Miria, does a lot of programs around inner parent and child work, where you go through some exercises of parenting yourself. And I think this idea of almost seeing yourself as your own parent, if you're an adult, is a great tool for you to begin to develop some of these ideas of accepting who you are and yet encouraging and coaching yourself to be better than where you are right now, just like we do with our children. I think that the child metaphor is a great one for us to use as we look at self-acceptance versus pushing for growth.
Yeah, you just mentioned that you assume that Gunnar is making the best choices he knows how to make at the level he's at. And I think that's a pretty good assumption to make about everybody. I think everybody's doing the thing that makes the most sense to them in the moment. Everybody's making choices that are, they represent their level of development, and they're it's not like, even self-sabotage, even when people make self-sabotaging choices, that's still the thing that makes sense to them. They're still trying to make the best choice that they can make in the moment. And this idea of beating yourself up because you're not at a higher level, or beating yourself up because you made choices in the past that maybe sent you off on a trajectory that you're not super happy about now, and that you have to play some, life cleanup now. This idea of not being able to accept your mistakes of the past, or not being able to accept yourself, that is a reality that we're all making the best decisions that we can. And so to beat yourself up about past choices and commensurately beating yourself up about your current choices, because you are at a current level of development, whatever that level of development is, and you're making the best choices you know how to make right now, even if they're not great choices. Even in the future, if you look back and go, oh, why'd I do that? You're making the best choices you know how to make. And my suspicion is that if you're into growth and development, your choices are getting higher quality as you go. You're not at the same level of development as you were earlier. And so even if these aren't the greatest choices, they're still probably higher quality choices, or more informed choices, or more mindful, or more thoughtful. And so giving yourself some space, to grow. This idea that you haven't arrived. Well, none of us have arrived. None of us are at the epoch of growth and development. So the same generosity of spirit that we recommend that you show to other people. I think we did a whole podcast on generosity of opinion and generosity of judgment, generosity of spirit, not judging others too harshly. This is a tool that not being too hard on people is a neutral tool that you can apply to yourself. You can be not too hard on yourself. You can not beat yourself up for choices that were not the greatest choices. You can give yourself some space to grow and recognize that, you need to cut yourself a little slack too. Now, what I've noticed is that usually when we are in a strong growth time period and we're starting to feel really worn down from it, that is generally a time period where we need to cut ourselves maybe even more slack. We did a podcast on what we call the HAT model. HAT stands for Healing, Achievement, and Transcendence. And these are 3 different personal development tracks that we take. I use the HAT model in my coaching a lot. I check in with people and kind of figure out is this person in a time period where they're trying to graduate from some trauma, right? Like they've got traumas in their past and they need some healing work from that trauma. So that would be a person in a healing time period. Or are they at a pretty decent space, but they're just trying to get to the next level? Like they're trying to get something accomplished. And that would be more of an achievement time period. And then the T stands for transcendence. And transcendence is anything that has a spiritual bent to it. It's a lot of times like ego work or unity mind or, something religious, spiritual, transcendent. But I want to, in the context of what we're talking about, I want to kind of focus more on those first two letters, healing and achievement. And my observation has been that when somebody's really beating themselves up over personal development and not feeling good about it, they probably need to take a little bit of time out for healing. It means that they are dealing with something that they maybe feel a little stuck about or don't feel good about themselves around. And generally, it's linked to some sort of trauma in the past, a trauma that, and it doesn't have to be like a profound trauma. When I say the word trauma, I'm not talking about necessarily like, your alcoholic father came home at 2:00 in the morning and beat the crap out of you every night, because you left the living room light on. I'm not talking about like huge traumas necessarily, although it could be those two. But it's more that there was some wounding that happened. And wounding in modern psychology, when you look at parent-child, relationships, wounding can happen when you, as a 2-year-old, reached out to your mom and she had something else going on, right? Like she had noodles on the stove and she turned away to get the noodle, and your little 2-year-old mind processed that as like a massive rejection. Like trauma can lie in there too. And it's totally arbitrary and it's nobody's fault, but you have some wounding there. When we really push ourselves in personal development and we're feeling like a profound sadness around it, or we're feeling exhaustion, or we're not feeling good about the process, we probably need to attend to a little bit of healing. And it might not even be traumas from the past. It might be current traumas. It might be healing work that we need to do right now. And just like anybody who's healing from anything physical, that's not the time to push yourself. Like you don't sign yourself up for a marathon if you're doing some physical therapy on your legs, right? It's a time period of rest. It's a time period of recuperation. Commensurately, if you stay in a healing space for too long, right? Like what if your leg does heal, but you've now gotten used to just sitting around? You've gotten used to watching daytime programming and you don't really want to get up and push your leg at all, and you don't really want to do the physical therapy you need to do. Well, now you've got a problem, because that is a time period when you should be pushing yourself. It's a time period where you should be going ahead and getting out of your comfort zone and putting a little pressure through the pipes and maybe experiencing a little pain to get to the next level in order to make sure that you have, full use of your legs again. And then if you keep pushing yourself, maybe you can eventually join that marathon or sign up for the marathon. So it's not really an either or scenario throughout our lives. It's contextual. If you are pushing yourself and you find yourself getting really totally beat up, like you feel like you're beating yourself up to get to next level, you probably are in a time period of rest. And just like we should listen to our bodies when our bodies need rest, our souls need rest too. So that's probably a time period of rest. But if you find yourself stagnating and you find yourself not really feeling good about your achievements, if you feel your self-esteem lowering, that's the trigger for now you should be in a time period of achievement. Now's the time to get out of your comfort zone and push and get to the next level and get that self-esteem, get that feeling of accomplishment and like you can really do something big. And then again, if you hit a level where you're starting to feel sad and dysthymic and not feeling good about yourself and you're no longer experiencing that self-esteem, then maybe you need to go back to the healing piece. So it's not an either or. It's contextual. It's a time period or a season in your life. And there's nothing wrong with being in a healing season, and there's nothing wrong with being in an achievement season. Regardless of what you have a tendency to gravitate toward, because we have a gravitation towards one or the other. Both of them are necessary to feel complete in your personal development work. And self-acceptance, I think, like radical self-acceptance, is that ability to listen to your soul, to your body, to your psychology, to your emotions, and give yourself what it needs in the moment. That's self-acceptance. It's acknowledging that you're going to need different things at different times. And it's being in tune with what you need in the moment. That's full acceptance, because now you're responding to who you are. You're not reacting like, no, I shouldn't be here. Well, that's not accepting yourself. Or I should be pushing myself harder. Well, that's not really accepting yourself. If you are truly at a space of self-acceptance, it means that you'll listen to what you need in the moment and provide yourself with what you need. And you won't become a slave to these tools. You'll be using these tools to serve you.
So saying it in that frame really made me think of something that I've struggled with in the last 3 to 5 years. Up until, about the age of 30-ish, I was able to go most of the day without eating. This is a real basic example here. I could go probably till 6 o'clock at night without eating, right? I could just get up and start working first thing in the morning, maybe a cup of coffee, and just push all day long. And I would even forget that I needed to stop to eat. I would be able to, my mind would be, at the time it felt like it was sharp, and I was able to execute whatever I needed to do and get my jobs done and function normally. And I kind of built a pride around this ability just to go without taking care of my physical needs. In the last 3 to 5 years, my body has told me a much different story. At this point in my life, if I don't eat something in the morning before my day gets started, protein shake or smoothie or some really high quality breakfast, and if I certainly skip lunch, I might be able to skip breakfast, but if I skip the lunch hour and I push into late afternoon, early evening without feeding my body nourishment, I start to break down. I start to get hangry. I get frustrated. I'll snap at people. My mind will be fuzzy. I won't be able to make it. And I have this hard time accepting myself that I need nourishment throughout the day, because up until now, I've been fine. Up until the last 3 to 5 years of my life, I've been able to just push and not have to worry about this. And I'm having a difficult time accepting that my physiology, my body has physically changed and it can't do what it once did back in my 20s. This is this is a basic example, but this is a tough struggle for me right now, because I'm always wanting to go. And I've got to listen to the feedback mechanisms and accept myself. Look, I just can't get up and push myself the way I used to. I have to be self-accepting that I have certain physical needs that are going to need to be taken care of through the day for me to show up as my best self. And so that's just a simple, very tangible example of what we're talking about. This idea of, does that mean I don't want to push and grow myself? No, of course not. I still push. I still work hard. I still do what needs to be done. And sometimes I can skip a meal. But the most important takeaway from that is I need to listen to my feedback mechanisms. I need to listen to accept what is my body telling me, not what should my body be telling me.
That actually triggers me to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This concept that we have certain basic needs that have to be met, otherwise we don't feel like complete people. And self-esteem and self-actualization are considered human needs. Now, they come after the needs of, basic survival and safety and security and love and belongingness, all the things that we think of as basic human needs. But once we get those needs met, we go to self-esteem and self-actualization. We have a basic human need to get to the next level, to feel good about our accomplishments, to push ourselves, to see how far we can go. It's a fundamental need. And usually when we're not reaching out for those needs, it's a sign that one of the earlier needs isn't being met. It's not that not all people have that need. It's that we all have that need for self-esteem, and we all have the need for self-actualization. We just might be stuck at an earlier need that is going perpetually unmet. Now, if you see it in that context, there is no discrepancy between self-acceptance and going for personal development. There's no contradiction there. In fact, they're a natural fit, because self-acceptance means acknowledging that you have basic fundamental human needs, like self-esteem and self-actualization. You can't really self-accept if you don't acknowledge that you have needs to become a better version of yourself. So self-acceptance will naturally lead to self-esteem and self-actualization. It will naturally lead to personal development projects, even if you call it something else. We use the phrase personal development and personal growth. And there's some people who don't like those phrases. So they just call it something else, right? They call it being an entrepreneur, or they call it being, a fitness junkie or whatever. They'll call it a different name. But we all have that need. And so acceptance means acknowledging that need and then getting your earlier needs met. Like you said, if you get hungry, all bets are off. Once you're not hungry anymore, you're good. So I don't think there's any contradiction or discrepancy between self-acceptance and pushing yourself for growth. I do think that there is a discrepancy between seeing growth as the most important piece. There's a discrepancy between self-acceptance and not allowing yourself to dip into other needs beyond just self-esteem. If you've got other needs that are going unmet, if you've got other things that need to be acknowledged, then self-acceptance means getting out of the personal development game for the moment and going addressing those other needs. That's pure self-acceptance. So it's really about not letting the tool become the master. It's really about acknowledging that that personal development journey is not, or the personal growth tools that you're using and implementing, you're not there to serve them. They're there to serve you. And I just about use the word journey. But I think I stopped myself because I want to talk about the journey of self-development as well. I mentioned earlier that there's no destination, and it's because improvement, self-improvement, self-growth, personal development, this is a journey. It's not a destination. None of us will become the most amazing, incredible, extraordinary, epic version of ourselves in a single lifetime. Like, there's going to be potential lost at the end of our lives. Our lifespan is not long enough for us to be whatever is the most amazing version of ourselves. Like, that's kind of, as far as I'm concerned, that's part of the human tragedy, is that we have more in us than we're able to express in a single lifetime. But that's how it is. We die. It's just how it works. So we have to make peace with that. So there's no destination. That simply means that there's no ending point that we know of. So since this path is a path that doesn't have a final destination except for the end of your life, because this path is about the journey, not where you're getting, but how you're experiencing things as you go, then personal growth isn't going anywhere. Like, if you need a time period for chill and relaxation, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily off the path. It just means that you're pausing for a moment. Or maybe you're walking instead of running. And there's really no reason to run. Like, the path isn't going anywhere. So feel free to walk if you need to. And if you're in a time period where you feel all lit up and you're on fire and you're feeling amazing, then go ahead and run in those moments. Go ahead and sprint. There are moments or time periods where we just want to sprint. We just want to run. And if that's what you want to do, run. Don't think that that's everybody's pace, or don't think that that's the pace you have to have. There are no shoulds in this world. If you are in a space right now where you need to chill, where you need to take a breather on the side of the road, or you need to walk, it's okay. The path will be waiting for you when you're done with your breather. It's not a problem. So think of this as the long game. And just like you mentioned, think of it as a game. This is the long game. This isn't something that we're racing for. We can go ahead and walk instead of run, and that's going to be okay.
I think your litmus test is your enjoyment of it. I think how you feel about what you're doing is really knowing, that's the measurement to know you're on the right path. Is, do I feel good? Now, you're not always going to feel good when you're growing, but ultimately, do I feel good? Do I feel joyous? Do I feel like I'm moving forward? And even if that's walking, you think about the marathons that people run. Some people don't run the whole time. Some people just walk and they finish the marathon. There is a finish line in that metaphor. But think of it like sometimes you're running, sometimes you're sprinting, sometimes you're just walking, but you're still moving forward. And I would say this, there is always going to be movement. That's the key thing here as well, is there's movement either forward or backward. There's very little static. There's very little staying in one spot. So I think one of the reasons why I personally, and probably you too, Antonia, have latched on this idea of personal growth, personal development, is I know that if I'm not growing, I'm atrophying. I'm moving backward. I'm probably losing things. And by growing, I not only keep what I have, what I've learned, what I've achieved, what I've moved forward with, but I keep adding to it. And you don't have to do it in these huge, epic movements. Like you said, you can walk rather than run through your growth journey. It doesn't have to be super epic or really fast. It could be a stroll for a while. And really, are you enjoying that stroll? If the stroll's enjoyable for you, if you feel like you're growing even incrementally every day, well, that's okay. Like, there's no real rules, like Antonia said, about this. So I think to reference back to this idea of self-acceptance versus personal growth or pushing yourself, I think embedded in that question is a false dichotomy. I don't really think it's one or the other. I think Antonia really hinted to this, and I'll hit it home, I guess. They're integrated. It's an integral system that's running, that you accept what is about yourself, about where you're at in your life, and about your past. The decisions you've made in the past you can't change, which is a tough one for me, I'll admit. To say, hey, I made the best choice at 22 I could make with the information I had at the time and the place I was at and the worldview I had. So I cut myself some slack. That's self-acceptance. Don't beat myself up now about choices I'm living with now based on that at 22. However, it's also saying, like, accepting myself where I'm at now, which is I am primed for more growth, and I'm willing to take some extra burden on because I want to grow even faster and even further than I thought was possible at the age of 22. So it's this idea, it's a false dichotomy, self-acceptance versus pushing yourself for growth. And I think that wherever you fall on that continuum, you're okay there. Like, it's going to be fine. You're going to be okay. It's just continue moving in one direction, because otherwise you're going to be moving backward, I think would be the big takeaway I take from this conversation.
Yeah, that feeling of being static or atrophying should be that's the red flag that maybe it's time to hustle. But I was thinking, as you were talking, one of the biggest personal development journeys of my life has been around body dysmorphic disorder. I've probably talked about it in previous podcasts, but this idea that just permeated my teens, my 20s, this concept that I was like too ugly to be loved, and all this just really toxic stuff that somehow I'd picked up from the system that was running in my life. Somehow that was the emergent. And I got addicted to it. Like, I got addicted to it as a feeling, and I got addicted to it as a strategy, in the sense that anytime anything bad in my life happened, I would just I called it my BDD basket. Like, anytime anything bad happened, it was because I was ugly, and that's why all of this was happening. And I spent years actively working on my issue with body dysmorphic disorder. Like, I went to therapy. I spent thousands of dollars in therapy. And I did all these personal development projects. And I started to write a book on the subject. And like, it just permeated everything. And there was a time period where you and I were not focused on my growth at the time. We were focused on one of your personal development projects. And that's kind of how we tend to do it as a couple. I'll be going through something and you're supporting me, or you'll be going through something and I'm supporting you. And sometimes horribly, we'll both be going through something and we won't have the resources to deal with it. Fortunately, those time periods are not that often, not that frequent. But we were actually focused on one of your personal development projects at the time. And I remember it. I have a terrible memory. So when I remember a circumstance or a situation, it means that it was a profound one for me. It means it was kind of important, or very important, not kind of. And we were looking at furniture in one of those strip malls, and they had put out all this, as is furniture on a parking lot. And I remember walking in and out of the as is furniture, and just, we were basically window shopping. We were just kind of walking around. And I had a moment when I was standing next to some as is couch that didn't have its ottoman or something. And I just went, holy shit, I'm not ugly. Like, it was just this moment. I was like, wait, I've never been ugly. And even if I was ugly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I was ugly, because it's not relevant. And none of this matters. And why have I been thinking that this mattered the whole time? So it was actually in a time period of quote unquote personal development rest. It was in a time period where I wasn't actively working on a major project of mine. It was a moment when I wasn't really thinking about it at all, where all of a sudden all the work that I had done before just hit home. And I'm like, I'm never going to have BDD again. And I just felt it. I felt it to the marrow of my bones. I was like, yep, I'm done. That's over. And of course, now I had to deal with a bunch of other stuff that I had been ignoring and assuming it was because I was ugly. Like, the chickens came home to roost, because once the basket was gone, now all of a sudden I had to address all this other stuff that I had been ignoring, or just assuming that it was a certain way because of how I felt about myself or whatever. But it was a moment of rest when I did one of the biggest scale up development time periods of my life. So don't underestimate the importance of a rest period. Sometimes it's when we're on the side of the road resting that all of a sudden we get these major ahas. Sometimes that's when we get the moment of the runner's high where we go, I think I'm ready to run. And we just start running, and then we get our runner's high and we just keep going. So don't think that you have to be pushing all the time. Pushing sometimes, that's not a bad thing. Resting sometimes, that's a great thing too. Don't underestimate those moments, because those can be some of the most powerhouse moments for real reflection. And that can be when you do some of your biggest quantum leaps.
So what do you think? This is a conversation around this idea of self-acceptance, and we framed it originally versus personal growth. I think it's a false dichotomy, though. And where have you found this coming up in your life? Where have you found yourself pushing, getting burned out, or feeling disillusioned, and then maybe feeling guilty about stopping and resting, or slowing it down and just walking? Where do you see the difference here? Do you see life as a problem to be solved? Or do you see life as a game to be optimized, something that we continue plus and make better and better every day? How do you view this? I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. You can leave a comment or ask a question directly below this podcast. We also have a ton of free articles and resources, videos, recordings. We're way over 100 podcasts by this point. Very similar to this. We talk about personal growth, personal development, and we want you to be a part of this community. So come over to personalityhacker.com and access some of the amazing resources we have there.
If you enjoyed what you heard, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling a sense of reciprocity and just want to let us know how we're doing, please leave a rating and review in iTunes. It really helps us with the cross-pollination or cross-promotion of our podcast, and it increases our numbers. So we'd be very grateful if you'd be willing to leave a rating and a review.
You can also find us at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We can't wait to talk with you on the next episode of the Personality Hacker Podcast.